Unfit to serve. That's what 111 former Republican national security officials said about former President Trump and why they wouldn't be endorsing him this go-round. In a letter released Wednesday, the 100-plus signatories pointed to Trump's, quote, dangerous qualities in having an unusual affinity for dictators like Russian President Vladimir Putin. The letter reads, in part, quote, as president, he promoted daily chaos in government, praised our enemies and undermined our allies, politicized the military and disparaged our veterans, prioritized his personal interest above the American people's. They added Trump's violated his oath of office when he incited the January 6th mob attack on the Capitol aimed at allowing him to stay in power after losing the 2020 election.
Signed by the likes of former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, former CIA Director Michael Hayden, and a slew of other officials spanning the Reagan and both Bush's administrations, the blistering letter was not just a condemnation of Trump, the president, but an endorsement also of Vice President Kamala Harris. The letter reads, quote, we expect to disagree with Kamala Harris on many domestic and foreign policy issues, but we believe she possesses the essential qualities to serve as president, and Donald Trump does not. Social media lit up in reaction to the news. Former Assistant Secretary of the Interior Jeremy Carl posted on X, quote, the deep state national security officials love Kamala Harris. And journalist Philip Wegman posted, quote, included on this list are Michael Hayden and Stephen Slick, who also signed another letter in 2020. Hayden and Slick signed the infamous letter from former Intel officials claiming without evidence that the Hunter Biden laptop bared all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. So I don't think this is going to be mattering all that much to most people. In fact, there are a lot of people on the right that say these officials, national security, former Reagan, Bush type people, led the Republican Party and the country astray in their foreign policy in the Middle East, the Iraq War, Afghanistan, and that it was to Trump's credit that he ignored them, that the fact that them booing him is good, he's right, is probably the reaction of many in the conservative circles.
Yeah, certainly, and we've seen this dynamic play out between the kind of cold warriors, which I would put a lot of these folks in that camp.
Cold War's over, people.
William Webster, others that were the traditional kind of Reaganite Republicans, hawkish on national defense, at odds with that kind of Trump populist, anti-interventionalist mentality, and we're seeing that dynamic play out in real time within the Republican Party. I don't, to your point, I don't think this sways a lot of rank and file voters out there in the country. I do think it maybe provides that permission structure, and we talked about this a week and a half ago, for some moderate Republicans out there, maybe those moderates that voted for Nikki Haley in some of those primary states, to then kind of make the pivot over to all the way to Vice President Harris. Of course, those endorsements, both the letter and some of the tweets that we read, weren't just anti-Trump, they were also pro-Kamala Harris foreign policy. So we'll see if that actually has an impact with some voting blocks.
Right. You say moderate, but it depends, what issues we're talking about. I mean, Reagan was a dove compared to some of these people. He didn't start World War III with the Soviet Union.
That's true.
De-escalated a bad relationship with the Soviet Union.
Program, yeah.
For sure. He wanted engagement and diplomacy. Meanwhile, the people here who are mad at Trump, they're mad let's be clear what they're mad about. They're mad because they think he's not going to start World War III with Russia over Ukraine. That's what they're upset about. Is that a moderate position? I don't know that it is moderate to think we must give an infinite and endless supply of our resources, contrary to public opinion, contrary to this what the American people want on this issue, to support this conflict. I don't know that that is moderate. And now, it is true that if you hold that view, you used to be someone who belonged in the Republican Party from from the 80s, 90s, continuing up until about 5 or 10 years ago. And now you belong in the Democratic Party. You belong in the party of Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris.
And we've seen, interestingly enough, Speaker Pelosi wears her Ukrainian medal pin oftentimes on the floor of the House. Of course, she has taken the strongest line on Taiwan. It's kind of interesting to see San Francisco liberal Nancy Pelosi kind of taking the mantle from the Reagan administration in terms of promoting strength abroad, standing with our allies, including Ukraine and
Mitch
Taiwan.
McConnell's there, and Marco Rubio, and Mitt Romney, and still many leaders within the Republican Party, but the rank and file members, and then clearly the base, the actual base, does not agree that being very involved in other parts of the world is good for American security. That tax dollars being spent on these things are a good idea, which is not to say that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia was a good thing or a permissible thing. It was wrong. It was evil. It has created needless, wanton destruction and a lot of death. But we have to think about our own country's interest, and we have to. It would be best to come to some kind of peace deal between these two countries, even if that involves making Ukraine, I would argue, a little bit unhappy or giving up some territory, is better than having the whole country taken over, slowly destroyed by a much more powerful adversary that we are not, maybe these officials who signed this letter are willing to go straight up direct confrontation, war, shooting down their planes, that kind of thing. But that is not what the American people want.
Certainly, a hot war with Russia is not what, or American.
Nor should they. It'd be crazy.
The factor, of course, is though with our treaty and our alliances, if Ukraine falls, as the vice president has said, and these national security Republicans have said, Poland's next, right? Which is a NATO country, which would be hugely.
Well, we got to defend NATO countries. We're committed to doing that.
We'd be involved there. So I think the thinking is if we are able to supply resources, material on the ground, not losing an American personnel in this fight, and we can degrade the Russian military, which we've seen, that bodes well for us potentially, and with China viewing everything that's going on, that could be helpful down the road.
What about what the point Phil Wegman raised, that some of these people haven't they discredited themselves by claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop, and this was the basis for so much media reporting on how the laptop was disinformation and you could ignore it. They put out a letter saying it looks like disinformation. Then Politico published a story about that, and actually they went farther. The real culprit, I always remind our viewers, my readers, etc., the real culprit was Politico, because they put out a headline saying, this letter says that it is disinformation, which is not what the people wrote in the letter. But that became the headline. And then when Joe Biden was asked about it during a debate with Donald Trump, he was able to delegitimize the entire laptop and say, well, the security officials say nothing to see here. And Trump at the time, it was a great clip. He's like, well, wait, you're saying it's Russia, Russia, Russia again with this? And he was right. Because it's not Russian disinformation.
Well, certainly hindsight's 2020, right? And to your point, they.
It wasn't a hindsight. Some of us said I didn't think it was disinformation at the time because we're going to have a fake laptop repair store owner. I
mean, it was a bizarre story to begin with. Yeah. Every story involving, speaking as a Democrat, every story involving Hunter Biden has some level of ridiculousness. Yeah. Certainly, and it was not out of the playbook, out of the realm of the playbook for Russian disinformation campaigns in the past. You rightly point out they had that caveat that it appeared to be, but certainly, mainstream media took it and ran with it, to the point of censoring some of the information out there on Twitter and other places. Now, do I think that swayed the election towards Joe Biden? Probably not, because I don't think a lot of Americans really care about Hunter Biden at the end of the day. They were exhausted with COVID and the incumbent administration. But certainly, as I said, hindsight is always 20.
Well, I mean, I think trying to censor the story massively backfired, and actually people paid way more attention to it because while they were able to, have it not actually, the story itself taken off social media, well, then there was all this reporting about why are they trying to cover this up? Why are they trying to hide this from you? And it ended up being a massive black eye for
anytime Hunter Biden, laptop, Russia were in the news as it was amplified was not a good thing for the Biden campaign, certainly.
Well, these officials are now proudly part of the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris.
Hopefully they vote in some of those battleground states. That's the only thing that I think will matter.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising right after this.